Welcome to July's session of Lunch Bytes. My name is Amanda Stinebaugh, and I'm the facilitator for these trainings. And I'm also actually your presenter today. But I do want to remind you that the purpose of these trainings is to offer targeted training to the staff and faculty of Neosho County. And by doing that, hopefully we will reach our students a little better and increase our ability to teach them more efficiently. So I do want to let everybody know that this session is going to be recorded, and eventually I'll post it to our YouTube channel, in which you guys can use later on to view for retraining if necessary. I think Nathan's trying to log on right now. So if you haven't already, could you go ahead and use the chat box and type your name, first and last name, so I can turn that over for attendance for these meetings? That would be fantastic. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Amanda. Sorry, I had one meeting end like 5 minutes ago, so.
Yes, I heard you. I was trying to take my time so that way I could get you in here.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead. I'm going to share my screen with you guys so we can start this presentation.
All right.
Okay, so today's presentation is called Bloom's Taxonomy Matters. And I'm assuming because you guys are all content experts, nobody, or maybe I shouldn't assume this, but education degrees probably aren't as prominent at the college level it is at the high school level, in which I typically teach. Is that correct? Can't see anybody. Okay. Well, with that being said, I just want to make sure that you guys understand that it's my job today to introduce you and to help explain what Bloom's taxonomy is and why it matters at the higher educational level. So a little background on Bloom's taxonomy. It was actually, it's given the credit, or the credit is given to Benjamin Bloom, although it wasn't just he that created this taxonomy. He chaired a group of educators back in 1956, I think it was. And as a group, collectively, they presented at multiple conferences, then eventually they published the taxonomy together, although he's the one that we give all of the credit to. Now, this current method of Bloom's taxonomy was actually revised in 2001, so it's not something that's stale and has just been setting since 1956. It is looked at a lot and more often than we think it is, and it's revised as necessary. So what is Bloom's taxonomy? Bloom's taxonomy is a set of 3 models that educators can use to classify learning objectives from the most basic lower level learning to higher learning skills. So from easy, basic, rote memory to higher classification or complexity. So if you think about, I'll give you guys an image for your brain here. Bloom's taxonomy looks like an upside down pyramid that has had the tip cut off of it. So it starts at the bottom, like I said, with the most basic skills. And as you work up the pyramid, you get more and more complex, and you get to stretch your higher thinking skills at that point. So as educators, that's what we should be doing with our students, or for our students, is we want to start them at the base of the pyramid, that basic information, and we want to take them step by step through each level to the very top in order to maximize their retention levels. So if we go through them step by step, one builds upon the next and the next and the next, and so on, and it helps them remember things and apply them much easier at the end. And I'm going to, I guess I forgot to tell you guys, since my background is in teaching, I'm used to calling on my students. So this is going to be pretty interactive, I hope, between you and I. So feel free to go ahead and unmute if you don't have any noise in your background, because I'm going to be asking lots of questions throughout this presentation, because I think presentations are boring if you're just getting preached at. So just like we use this method in our classroom, I'm going to use this method in this presentation because I want you to be as active in the learning as I am in your presentation. Okay, so let me go back to that. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in the beginning. All right. So Bloom's taxonomy focuses on 3 models. They are affective, cognitive, and sensory. Affective is more emotion-based, and the reason I wanted to make sure I touched on that today is because one of the RSVPs that I got was for psychology. So that's going to be more apt to be touched on in the psychology and emotion-based fields. And then you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, the sensory, that's going to be more tactile based. And I'm going to pick on Jen because I saw her in there. So for like surgical tech, where it's going to be more hands-on, even though there's basic knowledge and information that they have to remember, but it's more of a practice-based program. So you also will focus on the sensory model. But cognitive is larger in the middle because I wanted to focus more on cognitive domain today because it's been the primary focus of traditional education, and it's usually used to structure curriculum and those learning objectives that we strive to complete with our students in our classes. So my question before I move screens is, this is where you guys get to give me your opinion. I was hoping we could brainstorm together and maybe come up with the steps. So let's say I want to ask you to, I don't know, something random, build me a sidewalk out of bricks. So what is the learning process that takes place with that? So help me out. What's the very first thing that has to happen for you to be able to eventually accomplish the task that I've asked you to do?
Have some mortar. How to make mortar.
Okay, so I have to have my supplies. What else is there?
A blueprint.
Blueprints, right. So you're gonna have to receive the information, right? Whether it be blueprints, or maybe I'll tell you how to do the job, or maybe I'll draw you a picture, or maybe I'll give you a step-by-step instruction or a list of materials. However it is, you're going to receive the information in one way or the other. So just like with our students, we can't expect them to accomplish a task if we don't tell them how to do it, correct? So what's the second step in the learning process? So now that I've given you the information, what do you do with it?
Retain it.
It's harder than we think it is, isn't it? I'm sharing my screen and I can't see faces when I'm doing that. So I'm gonna go back and forth here. Come on, be brave.
Apply it.
Apply it. Okay, good. But before that though, Jen, there's something else that you got to do before you can actually do something with it.
I have high expectations of my students, fairly.
You have to think about it, right? You have to process that, and you have to make connections in your brain in order to be able to do anything with it. So let's say I want you to build a level, symmetrical sidewalk out of bricks. So if that's the task that I gave you, you would have to think about it and use some prior biology together. So what is symmetrical? What does it mean? What does it mean to be level? If I use the materials that I gave you and apply those knowledge, so, oh, that's what I'm probably going to need some sand, because the sand's going to help me level the bricks, and so on and so on. You have to think through that. And then you get to go do what Jen says. You get to actually apply it. So this is where you get to use it in some new way that you haven't yet done. So for example, I don't know if you guys, I know I have never drawn plans for a brick sidewalk before, but this is where I would actually start sketching or writing out some ideas or processing the information visually. And then the last step, this is where you get to do what?
Build it.
Yay, yeah, good, build it. This is where we actually get to build it. So when we learn something new and when our students are learning something new, there's 4 steps basically that they go through. Now, even though Bloom's taxonomy has 6 steps, it's going to help us go through there. But in general, there's 4 things that you do. You receive the information, you think about it, you use it in a new way, and then you put it into practice. Okay, so this is the learning process that we just talked about. Again, the steps are receive information, think about it, use it in a new way, and put it into practice. Now, this is the actual infographic or the most current infographic that was revised in 2001 for Bloom's taxonomy. And you can notice you start at the bottom, which is the most basic skills, remembering, and then you're going to move up step by step. And as you move up the pyramid, it's going to increase in the complexity of thinking. So we start at the bottom with remembering, and then we go to understanding, and then we move our students to applying, and then analyzing. But then the last two steps, creating and evaluating, I wanted to take a moment and talk to you about that, because even though those are considered the most highest thinking skills, they're actually interchangeable. They could be flip-flopped. So as long as you hit analyzing before creating and evaluating, you're going in the right order. So for example, well, actually, I'm not going to ruin the surprise because I have a surprise for you guys in just a little bit. But sometimes creating will actually happen before evaluating, but then other times evaluating will happen before you're creating. So just keep in mind that those two can be flip-flopped, but the other four are pretty much static in their order. So the very first step, actually, is there any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So the first step of Bloom's taxonomy is remembering. This is the base of that pyramid. And this is the step that involves actually recognizing and remembering facts, or maybe terms or concepts or answers, but not necessarily truly understanding what it means. It's just getting the information in my brain and retaining it long enough to tell you about it. So this is the basic knowledge level. So this could involve terminology. It could involve classifications, maybe generalizations. A lot of our classes deal with theories. This is where the students will receive that information, and then they just need to remember it. They don't need to do anything with it. They just need to plug it into their memory. So how do we do that? In your classes, how do you guys ask students to remember something?
Recite.
Recite. Good. That's a good one. What's another one?
Multiple choice tests.
Multiple choice tests. So do you ask them to do anything, or do you just tell them to, how do you get them to the point where they're ready to take that test though?
Unfortunately, in the online, they have to decide for themselves when they're ready.
Right, good. I was hoping somebody would say that. So oftentimes when it comes to the remembering stage, this is on the student's part. So everybody knows how they learn best, right? So some students like to make flashcards. Some people like to recite the information. Some people like to make up songs to help them remember. So all of that is going to be basically on the student's part. However, we can prompt them to do specific tasks in our classes. So in order to help us understand what students should be doing in this step, last night I was sitting there thinking about this presentation, and I wanted to ask you if you could come up with a mnemonic in order to remember the stages of Bloom's taxonomy. So R-U-A, A-E-C. Is anybody really good at mnemonics? So if I wanted to remember all steps, R-U-A, A-E-C.
I just have a chart, and I use that chart consistently. And underneath that chart, under each of Bloom's taxonomy, I use Costa's questioning to go along with that.
Perfect. Very good. So you just refer to the chart, right? So you use visual in order to help you remember.
Correct, because I mean it's just not the title of each step. It's also the questioning that goes into that step.
Very
and
good.
Also the type of assignment that is also in that step. So for instance, you know, in Bloom's taxonomy 1 and 2, a quiz or a written multiple choice test is good for, you know, remembering and understanding, but that does not cut it for those things above, you know, level 3, 4, 5, and 6 of Bloom's taxonomy, where you want students to understand, create, synthesize knowledge. And so one of the things in our program is there are no ones, because our Bloom's taxonomy is embedded within our syllabus as well. So students are that. So we also are teaching students what Bloom's taxonomy is as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are probably using Bloom's taxonomy. Maybe we're just not aware of the specific steps or names to those steps. But as learning adults, we've learned this process throughout life. So I think even though, like I said, you may not know that you're doing it, you probably are doing it without being aware of it. Well, does anybody want to give me a shot at a mnemonic? Any creativity out there?
I'm not good at that.
I'm not good at those.
I don't have anything for R and U yet, but I was thinking apples and extra carrots.
Oh, yes. Ooh, I don't know. It's a good one. Keep working on it.
What about rabbits and let's see, rabbits and
And
something with
unicorns?
R-U-A.
Rabbits and unicorns. Apples and extra carrots.
Okay. Well, mine isn't near as funny as I come up with, but I come up with red umbrellas always elude extraordinary class.
Wow.
Ooh, elude.
That would help me remember the steps if I was just learning Bloom's taxonomy and I just wanted to remember the steps so that way I could begin to grow my knowledge on those steps. That would be a way that we could prompt our students in order to do this very first low-level thinking skill. So good job, Jen. I like yours better than mine. Yours is funnier than mine.
And Nathan, I couldn't come up with rabbits.
Right, and Nathan. Good job, Nathan. I love the teamwork. Okay, so like previously mentioned, it's not about just remembering the name of the stage, it's actually what we do with it, the task that we ask our students to do with it. So this is a list of verbs that oftentimes can be used in the remembering stage of Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm just going to mention a couple of these. Memorize, obviously, we want our students to memorize the information, but remember at this stage, they don't quite comprehend or understand the information. We just want them to retain it temporarily. Match, select, recall, recite, like Jen said, it's not on here, but that would be a good one too. So all of these would be great verbs in order to prompt your students to do a specific task in order to get them to remember that information. So is there anybody out there that would like to share an example of a remember level task that you would ask maybe in your course?
Memorize the quadratic formula.
Perfect, exactly. Yeah, you're telling them what to do. Not necessarily, they may not understand the different components of the formula yet, but as long as they remember the formula, you can work from there. So great job. So the second step up in Bloom's taxonomy is understanding. And this is where comprehension involves demonstrating understanding by organizing the information. Sometimes we can ask them to compare the information or describe the information, possibly even interpret information, but we're getting them to actually take it one step further beyond just remembering the information. Now we're going to start beginning the process of processing the information. So some verbs that could be associated with this particular level: distinguish, paraphrase, summarize, discuss. Sometimes we say, you know, discuss, turn and discuss with the students next to you about this concept, and we let them talk for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll bring them back to our discussion or our class lecture. Identify, indicate. All of those are really good verbs that we could use to take students from the remember level to the understand level. Can somebody give me an example of a task at the understand level for your particular course?
I
could ask.
Oh, sorry. Go.
Go ahead.
I would ask my students, like, distinguish the difference between these different types of mastectomies.
Perfect. Yeah. Go ahead and give me another one.
I have the students summarize and explain concepts in their own words and don't allow them to use very much quoted because that doesn't show understanding.
Absolutely. That's perfect. That was actually on one of my notes here that I have written down is making sure that the students can explain it in their own words. So
Yeah.
great job for touching on that.
On one of my rubrics, the most points possible is defining in their own words, middle points possible using the textbook's definition, and then on down.
Nice. That's amazing. And oftentimes, I mean, we prefer, or I'm glad I don't teach surgical tech, because I would assume that we would want to use those textbook definitions and terms, but I understand completely where you're coming from, because it shows a deeper understanding if they can put that into their own terms. So great job, Jen.
Jen gets a star.
The next level of Bloom's taxonomy.
I'm an overachiever.
The next level is applying, or this is our application level, and this involves using the acquired knowledge. So basically this means solving problems in new situations, maybe, and we're going to do this by identifying connections to that prior knowledge. So think back to the example that I gave you with creating the sidewalk out of bricks. So this would be that prior knowledge that I was talking about. We need to know what the word level means. We need to know what symmetric is. We probably need to know that, I mean, we all know this in our brain, but sand is not a solid structure. So we're going to need to know that it will move a little bit. We need to know how to make mortar, what mortar is, what its purpose is. All of that prior knowledge, the students at this point will be wrapping their brains around all of that stuff in order to get a better understanding of the concept that we're asking them to learn. So I'm going to give you a question here, a question at this level that maybe I would ask my students, because I teach a lot, like in anatomy, I do nutrition and that kind of stuff. So I might ask them, would apples prevent scurvy, a disease caused by the deficiency in vitamin C? So at that point, it's asking them to recall prior knowledge in order to answer my question. So maybe I was teaching them about vitamin C deficiency, but then they have to remember about apples. We were taught that in elementary school. Do apples have vitamin C? Is it enough to prevent scurvy? And so on and so on. So that's how they're going to make those connections using that prior knowledge. Now, it's not always the question you ask, but again, it goes back to these verbs. So a few of them would be to discover or produce or manipulate. And as in the past levels, I'm going to ask for an example. So can somebody give me an example of an application level prompt that you may give your students in order to take them to that third level, that application level of knowledge?
Well, with my course, or college algebra or calculus, I might have a projectile motion problem that follows a parabolic path or quadratic function, and ask them after how many seconds does the object hit that function will equal 0 again, or reach a height of 0. So they have to solve it, and it may involve using quadratic formulas. So that might be an example.
Perfect, because they're going to have to call on lots of prior knowledge in order to answer that. What it seems like a simple question, well, if you understand mathematics, but there's a lot that is involved in solving that question. So that's perfect. Does anybody else have a question they would like to share?
I use it every
Sure.
week in my lifespan development, where they have to apply the concept they just described in to a fictional character that they've actually created. So they're going to raise a person through the whole lifespan, and each concept they have to then apply to that person at a particular stage.
Oh, I love it. That's very, very creative. I like that a lot.
Thank
Great
you.
job. All right, so the next step then to Bloom's taxonomy is this is the very top level of our pyramid. So this is the one that's all the way to the right. This is analyzing, and this involves actually examining and breaking down the information in order to, well, breaking it down into smaller parts in order to understand each particular component and how it works together. So what's really important at this level is, even though they need to break everything down and know the purpose and function of each level, they also need to be able to support their statements. They need to be able to use references, and they need to be able to go back and they need to say, I believe it is this way because of this. So they need to be able to use those references when we take them to this next level. Some verbs on this one could include analyzes, obviously, a good one. Outline, examine, separate, compare. I like contrast on this one. I use compare and contrast quite often in my classes because I want them to think outside the box and I want to have them think from multiple directions. Does anybody have a specific example that they would use in their course for this level?
Sure. We would have our students based on that history and physical, progress notes, lab reports, and discharge summary to assign the proper ICD-10 codes and the proper current procedural terminology codes.
Okay, I have no idea about that stuff, but so I'm going to say yes, let's go with that. You just use language that I am absolutely unfamiliar with, so I would have to step back down to that remembering stage and then start completely over. But if you're asking them to apply, obviously it's the same, and you're asking them to apply multiple areas, so they need to be able to tie those areas together. So I know you're on the right track there.
Amanda, I thought of a different example with mathematics, for instance,
Yeah.
in complex algebra we have functions and inverse functions. Where inverse functions essentially, I explained it to them, it's kind of like the undo button in Word or Excel. It undoes the regular function in reverse order. And so what I might have them do is I'll give them a functions equation. They have to break it down into a sequence of steps. And then when they do the inverse function, they have to break it down into a sequence of steps, keeping in mind that that function undoes the original function in reverse order. And so then they have to derive the inverse functions equation based on the breakdowns that they came up with. So that sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I could successfully pass your class.
We're talking like 2 points.
I don't ask too many questions like that. It's really not as terrible.
But you're absolutely right. Like you said, with they have to break it down, and then obviously the undo function, it takes it to another level of thinking, another direction of thinking. So that's absolutely what is needed in this level. All right.
One of the things we do in our class is we kind of employed the student teaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so would that fit in this category, or would it be one before maybe? But basically I ask them what's happening and what about it was hard for you to learn, because then that makes them think about, well, if it was hard for me to learn, then it's going to probably be hard for someone else to learn. And then I require them to have at least one consideration that is out of the box, that's not in the textbook, that's just out there to keep in mind for every procedure. And one of my best ones this semester was a student who was presenting about burns and debridement of burns. And her ST consideration was, well, we have to have the room really hot for the patient's safety, so you need to wear a lot of deodorant. I was like, okay.
Yep. Good suggestion.
Not in the textbook.
Actually, I think you're at this level, Jen. You're at the application level, but then when you ask them to give an out-of-the-box suggestion, that's actually taking them to the very most top level, the evaluation and the creating. So you're doing both at the same time. So
Okay.
That's great. So which actually brings me to my next slide, which is that evaluating. Now remember, the evaluating and the creating can be flip-flopped. But in order to go with my mnemonic that I made, I put evaluating first. So evaluating, oops, I should go back real quick, is where students will actually present and defend an opinion. So this is what I was telling you about, Jen, is where they're actually going to think of that out-of-box suggestion and apply it and use all of that prior knowledge in order to give a good suggestion. Because the evaluating level is based on internal evidence and also external criteria. So it's going to be the rules that you give them, but then also everything that they already know. They're going to apply all that together at once. So they're going to defend opinions. They're going to make judgments. They're going to determine validity of specific things. All of that occurs in the evaluating step. So this is one of our most highest thinking skills that we can use. And it's making us step back and actually survey the concept and then actually make a decision or determination as to, well, how to solve that problem. So some verbs that we could use for this one would be to categorize or rearrange, or tell. Tell me a suggestion that would better the situation. Revise, comply, combine. So I think combine, I'm sure Nathan, in mathematics, I'm sure you use that word quite often. Is there anybody out there that would like to share a specific example that relates to their course?
We have students create a diversity and inclusion policy.
Perfect. Very good. So when they create that, to me, I consider that creating. Do you have them take it a step further, and then do they evaluate those policies?
Or we also give them scenarios in which they have to apply the policy to that scenario.
Perfect. And then determine if it was appropriate or not. That's great.
Correct.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Someone else want to share one? Okay, that's all right. So the last step of the 6 steps for Bloom taxonomy is creating. And again, this is flip-flopped with evaluating depending on the situation. Oops. And this involves actually building a structure or a plan or a presentation or something in that sense. It's taking all of the individual parts and putting it together as a whole, like a final project basically, and it's wrapping your head around everything, and it's showing your utmost understanding of a concept. Being science-based, I usually ask my students to do like a lab report, so it includes a procedural plan of materials and so on, but then it gets down to the bottom, and we get to the analysis and the synthesis part in order to take them through that evaluating part. Is there someone out there that would like to share an example before I go to the verb page?
We have surgical procedure reports that they're required to do. I don't know that it is quite this high though, because a lot of it they can gather from their text and then just move over, so they don't have to really come up with the solution to every scenario. And that's,
yeah. So do you think
but it's a lot of reports.
More of like the understanding and application level then? Those
Yeah. So when I do that, that's the reason why I added in the ST consideration, was because everything else was coming straight out of their text, and the text is truth. There's nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't require them to like say, okay, what happens when I do this for the first time? What do I need to think about? Right. So that's where that came from. So we would probably flip flop and we would do the other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's understandable.
One of the problems I find is that my adjuncts struggle with level 5 and 6 of Bloom's taxonomy, especially when trying to design assessment instruments for those 2 levels of Bloom's.
Absolutely. And why do you think that is?
I just don't think they have the experience of designing at that level. They tend to want to believe that a test or a quiz or solves all or teaches all, and that's not the case. And so over the last 2-year period, having to reinforce Bloom's revised taxonomy and individually teach them these levels and the verbs that go along with it was, it's still a little frustrating sometimes.
I agree completely. I think experience plays into that dramatically, but also too, I notice with the teachers that I work with that when you get to level 5, level 6, you have to let go of some control. And oftentimes as instructors or teachers, we don't want to do that because that just promotes chaos and who knows what's going to happen. So maybe that could be the problem too, is we just need to be more comfortable with the situation and allowing our students to take it to that next step without us necessarily leading them, but maybe we could be facilitators versus leaders.
This might be a good opportunity to, I don't have a well thought out plan, but this might be a good opportunity to have like a forum assignment where you might have it might either be really open-ended on your part as the instructor, and then they have to plug in their knowledge, or you could systematically throughout the course of a online course, maybe even to make it manageable, you could have a student create an assignment that they submit to you, and then you plug that in for them, and then you require the remaining students to respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then systematically, every student has to create an assignment, and then in so doing, they are having to think beyond the topic of what do I know to what do I want everyone to know because I know it.
Right. Are you sure you didn't look ahead in my presentation because it's in there? But yeah, definitely is making them do that. That's great. That's perfect.
In my last discussion question of the course, I asked them to sort of appraise their own learning in relationship to raising this virtual person from life to, so appraise how they learned it, how the process of their learning, concepts that were hard and how they worked through it. So kind of get them to sort of analyze and not only summarize the process, but also appraise what worked and what didn't work, and sort of assess how they had to adjust as they finally really grasped what they were supposed to do.
Absolutely. It's like a culminating, I guess, explanation and application for all of our students. That's great.
What if we stop using the word grade and start using the word appraise?
There you
I'm
go.
going to appraise your paper right now.
How do you think the students would react to that?
I didn't get what I wanted. Like when my house got appraised.
Yeah.
Hey, but they had a rubric for that paper, so they knew what was coming.
Right.
That's right. All right, well, you probably noticed as I showed you the verbs, the shapes have changed every time, and it's because I'm gonna make sure, as long as you put your name in the chat, I'm gonna make sure I send you my resources. But all of those verbs are found on an infographic for Bloom's Taxonomy, and it looks like this if you haven't seen it before. But I'm gonna make sure I send that out to everybody that was on the presentation today. So that way you can use it for future references. So when you go to using and implementing Bloom's in your classroom, you can refer to this, and that'll help you with those prompts that you should be asking your students. Just make sure, obviously, we're mixing it up a little bit, and then before you know it, it's going to be perfect practice for you. Oops. All right, so back to the presentation. So we've covered remembering, understanding, application, analysis, creating, and evaluating. So all of those wrapped together, I want to, we're going to just review over those very quickly. And sometimes it's best in presentations to not hear it from the same person again, so I would like to play a short video for you.
Think about it. Don't be silly. Think.
Think before you act.
There are some things we don't really need to think about. When someone asks you, "What is your name?" you can instantly respond. And we all know the answer to 1 + 1 is 2. But sometimes we need to really think about things. What subjects do I really enjoy studying? What would be a good career? What will I do this weekend that will be really exciting or valuable? When you think about it, there's a lot of thinking involved. Let's unpack thinking and map it all out for you. In the 1950s, American education psychologist Benjamin Bloom determined that there are 6 categories of thinking. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and design. When your teacher asks you a question, what they are really asking you to do is think within one or more of these categories. For example, if your teacher asks you, "What is the capital city of a country?" they are asking you to think at the remember level and to act like a database, such as a Google search engine, and recall the name of the capital city. There are some great tools to help you remember information. For example, if you were required to remember the names of the 8 planets in order from the sun, you can use the thinking tool called a first letter mnemonic with my very eager mother just served us nectarines. The first letter of each word reminds us of the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. There are lots of other great memory tools, such as the alpha ladder, acronyms, rhymes, and flashcards. Why not try creating a transfer booklet? All of these tools will help you at the remember level of thinking. At the understand level, you are asked to act like an expert. Aha, I understand this. I could explain how this works and describe this carefully to someone else. Similarly, there are some great tools to understand information, such as the cause-effect map, concept maps, and the Y chart. At the apply level, you're using all of your existing knowledge and applying it in a new situation. For example, you may know the mathematical rule for finding the area of a rectangle. If someone asks you to find the area of the school car park, you can apply your existing knowledge to find that out. Have you ever been asked to think critically about a topic? Critical doesn't mean thinking negatively about something. In fact, critical thinking involves balanced and considered decision making and is at the analyze and evaluate levels. To analyze something, try breaking the topic or issue into component parts and carefully examine each of these parts as if you were looking at each through a magnifying glass. Once this is complete, act like the scales of justice to weigh up the evidence of your research and make a decision or recommendation based on the information collected and organised in the analyse component of your thinking. This is the evaluate level. Here's a hint. Use the thinking tools at each of these thinking levels to make critical thinking even easier. We finally arrived at the creative thinking level, design. Acting like an inventor and coming up with new products, ideas, and ways of doing things can be sometimes difficult. Find inspiration, organise your ideas, and get creative using the thinking tools at the design level. Thinking can sometimes be challenging, mysterious, and complex. However, when we know the level of thinking and when we use the appropriate thinking tools, life becomes that much easier.
Okay, so that was just the exact same information we all just had, but presented in a different way. So is there any questions before I continue with the presentation?
Nope.
Okay, so as part of the invitation that I emailed out to everyone, I did ask for RSVP. It's okay if you didn't. I'm glad you're here. However, the reason I did ask for that is because I wanted to give specific examples on how you could use each level in your classes. So if you RSVP'd, then I'd have a page for you. If not, you can still apply it to your levels. But I want to go through those that did RSVP. So is our OTA here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, very good. So remember, I know you guys are the masters of your domain, and I'm absolutely not familiar at all with OTA, but I did thankfully look at Amazon, and I looked through a OTA textbook, so I kind of had a little bit of understanding so I could give you a presentation today. But I picked the concept cerebral palsy. So if you were teaching that to your students, these are just examples again, and I hope my information is correct. Correct me if I'm not right. But at the remembering level, what you could do is ask the students to read the specific pages in the textbook associated with cerebral palsy, and then you could have them make flashcards for future references. Then to take them to the understanding level, you could have them classify cerebral palsy into 4 categories. And those categories are monoplasia, diplasia, hemiplasia, and quadriplegia, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Application level, you could ask them to, using those 4 subcategories, to produce a list of OTA techniques to assist with each of them. That would be an application. Analyzing, you could have them illustrate each of those subcategories, so meaning draw them out. I do know by my research on this, monoplasia only affects one area of the body. So then obviously maybe they could draw a gingerbread man and only color in maybe the arm of the gingerbread to illustrate their understanding that monoplasia only affects that one part of the body. Creating, notice that I put creating before evaluating in this particular example. For creating, you could have them select one subcategory and compose a plan of care for a patient. So if a patient had quadriplegia, then you could have them compose a plan of care that an OTA would possibly need to follow in order to assist that particular individual. And then at the evaluation level, you could have your students justify the plan of action that they came up with scientific documentation as to that this would be the best procedure for that particular student. So all of this could easily take place within, one 50-minute, or I don't know how long your guys' sessions are. I know mine are 48 where I teach, but all of this, you could take them through that. Now, granted, obviously, you'd have to send some home with them and maybe even run over to the next class time that you meet. But it doesn't take very long to take them from basic knowledge to higher thinking skills. However, keep in mind, though, if you felt like the students weren't progressing as fast as they should, don't rush them through the steps, because we're here to help them understand. And by taking them from one step to the next, it just builds on their knowledge. Another example that I have, is there any questions on that one? Okay. Another example that I had, some RSVPs, I had 2 of them from the nursing department. So I chose the concept, if I was teaching my students about white blood cells at the remembering level, oh, that come from my other page, sorry. It should say, have them define what a white blood cell is and any associated terms going with that. At the understanding level, they could make a mnemonic for the 5 types of white blood cells. So my mnemonic is 9 little monkeys eating bananas. Can you, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Can you name all 5 white blood cells? That's okay. I'd have to look them up too.
Lymphocyte.
I know neutrophils and monophils and basophils. That's about all I remember.
Eosinophils.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. So at the application level, what you could actually do for your students to help them concrete the idea of white blood cells is you could have them use construction paper or colored paper, and then they can make a silhouette of each kind, because each white blood cell has, if you're not aware of that, they typically have things on the outside. So those things allow the white blood cells to do specific tasks within the body. So you could have them do those silhouettes so then they could recognize the stuff on the outside. On the analyzing level, you could have them contrast between the types of white blood cells, so all 5 of them using a 5-column T-chart. So T-charts, Y-charts, things like that are, we could always use, keep them in our toolbox for moments that we need students to analyze or contrast certain things. And again, at this example, I put creating first. I asked them to prepare a cheat sheet to prepare, to share with a peer on the 5 specific types of white blood cells. And then the evaluating step, I can ask them to assess a peer's cheat sheet and then make suggestions on how to change them or how to better them. So all of those steps, again, takes them from lower level thinking skills, those foundational skills, all the way through the higher level thinking that we want our students to walk away with at the end of our classes. Questions on that? Perfect. All right, Jen, this is for you, I guess, Jennifer, sorry. The surgical technology, again, this is not my forte. So again, I referred to Amazon, and I took a sneak peek of a surgical tech textbook, and I chose the topic, a surgical hand scrub. I hope that's what it's called. At the remembering level, you could just ask them to flat out memorize the procedure for a 3-minute scrub. I hope I got that right. Then at the understanding level, you could have them make a song or a rap or a mnemonic or something not a mnemonic, I'm sorry, to scrub to. So everybody knows the hand washing song, right?
Twinkle, twinkle.
You're going to make me sing on this presentation. So it's that top and bottom, in between, rub them all together, now they're clean, now they're clean. If you sing that twice, then you've washed your hands long enough in which that they're supposed to be clean enough.
I'm going to need the lyrics to that. I have little humans, and okay. I didn't know that song.
That's how, yeah, when I taught preschool, that's how I taught the kids to scrub their hands long enough to make sure that they were clean. You sing that song twice. So you could always have your students come up with a song in order to use, to repeat to themselves multiple times in order to make sure that they necessarily scrub as long as they need to. Another thing for application would be to practice the procedure, obviously, at a sync while they're singing the song. So it's just taking it one step further than the previous step. Analyzing, they could identify potential areas of contamination in OR. And out of the many conversations that I've had with you, I know that contamination is a huge thing when it comes to the surgical tech department, and it should be, obviously. So you could, now that they know how to clean themselves and decontaminate themselves, you could take them to this next level and have them identify those areas in which contamination could occur.
Yeah.
Evaluating, you could have them devise a plan of action for a scrub room in order to avoid contamination. This means a step-by-step process, that could include turning the door handle, or opening the trash can with your foot, not your clean hand. I mean, it would include all of the steps from washing to getting to the OR in order to make sure that you are not contaminating yourself. And the last step, and you guys notice on this one, I did flip-flop, or I did not flip-flop evaluating and creating, because I would ask them to create an infographic that maybe could be posted somewhere that would explain the procedure of hand washing, and then also those cautions of contamination in various areas. So it takes them from level 1 all the way through level 6. So
that's great.
I hope I did that right, Jen.
Yeah. You can scrub a case.
No, I don't know about that. I could tell somebody how to do it because I read about it. That's about it. Okay, for psychology, I use the topic attention deficit disorder because I figured as an audience, we all would be pretty familiar with ADD. So at the remembering level, we could ask them just to define it in the associated terms. At the understanding level, we could actually ask them to share personal stories or maybe even make-believe stories about ADD. And we could use that to have a better understanding and that thinking process before we can take it to the application. So at the application level, we can read and diagnose various case studies. I know a lot of the textbooks at the college level, they have case studies, whether it's embedded within your chapters or also at the back of the textbook, there may be. Or if not, Google's a great resource. At the analyzation level, you could have them illustrate the life of a person with ADD without using words. And I actually had to Google that because I really wasn't real sure what to do. And when I Googled ADD and I just clicked images, I was actually quite surprised with, I thought that I would learn more by textual images, but the images without text, I thought I took more away from. So I thought that would be a different aspect for our students to take, because oftentimes we refer to language in order to display our understanding. But if you take language out, it's a lot harder to depict what you're trying to say, but maybe would help them learn a little better. Then creating, you could have them role play with peers in various scenarios on maybe assisting a person with attention deficit disorder, or maybe they could actually play the role of somebody that has the attention deficit disorder, so that way they could live in their shoes momentarily. Then evaluating, I don't know, I think SOAP notes are still a thing. I know they are at the chiropractor's office that I work for, but I don't know if they are in psychology anymore, so I apologize if they're not. But you could have the students interpret a SOAP note from a fake patient, and then they can design a plan of care from there. So it's taking both the creative and the evaluating and smashing them together. Questions, anyone? Okay, so then the last RSVP I got was mathematics. And again, I'm a science person. I know enough math to maybe get me in a little trouble, but that's about it. So I took a concept that I thought most people would be familiar with, would be the Pythagorean theorem. And at the remember level, we can ask our students to recall the formula from your notes, because obviously as instructors and math instructors, you're going to share that with your students if you expect them to use it. At the understanding level, you can ask them to distinguish between the three parts of the formula. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And then at the application level, you can ask them to, using a given triangle, go ahead and solve for one of those components. So then they can take that formula and then they can solve for one part of it. And analyzing, you can have them model the steps of solving for one component, or even two components or three components to appear. At the creation level, you can ask them to create, or I use the word synthesize, but it creates the same thing, a practice worksheet, and obviously an answer key, because you want to make sure that they can correctly do it, maybe containing 10 problems that they could share with the class. That kind of goes on the lines that Jen was saying. I think it was Jen that said that they could create a worksheet. And then evaluating is you can compare and contrast the Pythagorean theorem possibly with a distance formula. So the point between, or the distance between point A and point B, so we can maybe apply both of those concepts together and get the students a better understanding. Did I do that right, Nathan?
Yeah, I like your selection for evaluating, because that's exactly what I do when I present the distance formula and I talk about how it's derived from the Pythagorean theorem.
Look at that.
Yeah.
All right, well, that brings me to the end of my RSVPs. So at this point, I'm just going to open it up to the audience and ask if anybody has any questions over any of the levels, or maybe possibly even how to apply that in your course. Everybody's
For me and my program, our curriculum comes with Blooms attached. So the Blooms, the outcomes, they're already presented to us. And so, so for us, the only part is we don't have to figure that part out. We just have to design to meet the standard.
Perfect. That's very helpful when you get those resources. Anyone else on the call have any final questions? Okay.
I thought I enjoyed the presentation. That was very good.
Well, thank you. I didn't believe that I could do it, but I did fill an entire hour. So if there aren't any questions, then I would like to say thank you for joining this month's Lunch Bytes session. And in August, we will have another one. It's going to be a sneak peek of things that changed on Inside NC. So I will be sending out that invite to you sometime in early August. And I ask that you just attend if possible. So thanks, guys, for coming. And I appreciated all of the interaction between the audience. It made our presentation very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Amanda.
you.